Okay, let's get started. Good afternoon, or good evening, or good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Mutile Mwongo, and I am a Systems Practice Pathfinder and Climate and Health Research Affiliate at Development Dynamics. I will be your host today, and I will be joined by a wonderful panel and team of systems practitioners who you will get to meet a bit later on. But we're thrilled to partner with Food for the Hungry today to bring you this discussion about systems practice for social impact. But before we get started, I would like to invite Rashid, who is going to tell us a little bit about Last Thursdays. As you can see on the screen, this is a Last Thursday series. So he will tell us what that means and why this is something we do at Development Dynamics. Over to you, Rashid.
Thank you so much, Mutile. And once again, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you all, wherever it is you're joining us from. We are absolutely excited to be hosting you today for a Last Thursdays series. And I know for those who have been participants who have joined us for other series, karibuni sana, welcome back again. And for those who are new, well, you have found the home where we get to have very meaningful conversations and interactions. And so my task here today is to really just talk about what Last Thursdays is. Last Thursdays, at Developing Dynamics, we believe in the aspect of how do we collaborate? How do we connect together as a community? How do we ensure that for transformation, there's this aspect of really sharing insights, sharing knowledge, and sharing the best practices in order to be making impact to the communities that we're serving. And so last Thursdays, or every last Thursday of the month, we convene thought leaders, we convene practitioners, we convene enthusiasts to discuss a wide range of topics that are really shaping today's marketplace. This Last Thursdays is a monthly gathering designed to just encourage some peer-to-peer learning, to encourage collaboration, and to also just spark innovation and innovative thinking within the development and innovation landscape. Our objectives are very simple: is have an open space for dialogue, knowledge sharing, facilitating information, formation of partnership and collaboration, and inspiring that innovative thinking and creative solution making. And also exploring what are the emerging trends and best practices in development and information. This month, we've had a wide range of topics over the last couple of months, ranging from intersectional feminism, movement building in the social impact space. And this month, we have another very amazing, very beautiful, very intriguing conversation that we're having, where we're talking about systems practice for social impact. As Mutile has mentioned, there's a wide array of speakers and panelists joining us today who will just get to share with us and then really unpack. When we say systems practice, right now, if you're seeing the slide that is on, there's so many lines that are connecting and not connecting and going zigzag, ziggy. And so we're hoping that with the speakers that we have today, we can really unpack this conversation, unpack and understand the meaning of systems practice, why it is important, why do we need it, what is the aspect that we need to focus on in the different spheres of influence that we are in with the communities that we're serving. How does systems practice really help us have that maximum impact with them? And so I am excited to welcome you all to this conversation. I'm excited to also learn myself from the amazing panelists that we have. And without further ado, I think I've put the cream enough on the cake, and now I can invite back Mutile so that we can begin cutting this cake that is systems practice for social impact. Back to you, Mutile.
Thanks, Rashid, for that introduction. And yes, he has mentioned a little bit about what Last Thursdays has been this year. And last month, we talked about the Pact for the Future. And in that conversation, we talked about systemic issues and what is the position of everyone in, huge problems that we can't seem to keep track of, we can't seem to ever really solve. So we're building up on that conversation, talking about systems practice. And before we go into definitions, I'd like to maybe just set the stage and help us make sense of this discussion. So if we could go to the next slide. So what exactly has made us come here today? Let's think about the current state of the world. There are so many problems. It feels like every day there's a new thing we're facing. Especially in the last 4 years, for instance, we know that COVID had massive impact. Things that we couldn't imagine happening, and those impacts are still being felt today. And then a year or so later, there was the Ukraine war, and it happened where a country that's not really on Kenya's radar had such huge impacts on our economic system. So the global supply chains were affected, prices of many goods went, they skyrocketed, and that really affected people in developing countries, and especially people who are in vulnerable positions. So vulnerable populations are often disproportionately affected. And then we've also had over the last few years multiple environmental disasters around the world. There's been tsunamis in East Asia, extreme heat waves in Europe, floods and drought. There's been wildfires in Australia around the time of COVID as well. In Canada, we had wildfires also. And it's concerning because all of this is happening within a very short period. So there's almost no buffer time for you to wrap your head around what has happened, around what have you lost, around what's the next step, what can we do to, prevent this from happening in the future, or even just prevent and mitigate the effects that people are facing. And so as people working in social impact and development, it can be really frustrating to be hit by different problems from each side. You take one step forward and several steps back. So we are now trying to understand the nature of the problems we face. We can see that they are wicked, they are complex, they are interconnected, and they are compounding, so they exacerbate each other. Economic crisis is exacerbated by political crisis, and so on and so forth. But just in case this feels too distant from us, let's scale down a little bit and bring it closer home. And in the next few slides, I would like for us all to reflect upon issues that are Kenyan. So you will see some photos and some images from the news, and just take a moment to reflect on what these events meant for you as a Kenyan, for your community or for the community you work with. Some of these issues are ongoing, some of them are in the past, but just think back to that moment and what it meant for you. Next slide, please. You can go on next, please. Yeah, thank you. And so these are things that have happened just in the last 1 or 2 years. We know that there was a terrible drought, and it is still ongoing, but has eased up. It was considered the worst drought in 40 years. And you can imagine being in the midst of that. And what does that mean for people who live in arid and semi-arid regions? That's their livelihood. They lose all their livestock. And so it's really devastating. And so there's a very high chance that people get into conflict because they need a way to make a living. And, there's just tension throughout their community. Another angle of this is that vulnerable youth get recruited into armed groups because it seems that there's no way out of it. You don't have your livestock anymore, and it's just a dire situation in which you feel desperate. So you try to find a way to get resources for yourself. So we've also seen just previously how 4.4 million people are in an acute food insecurity crisis. And this is just as of last year. At the same time, last year, we had El Nino being announced, and there was quite severe flooding at the end of the year and earlier this year. And so these issues just keep happening one after the other. And we feel like it's a catch-22 where there's nothing we can do. There's no one person that we can point to solve this problem. And so it's clear that the approaches that we've been taking to address some of these issues are not sufficient. And so I think this is where systems thinking and systems practice comes in. But before we go into any definitions, let's reflect. And next slide, please. We're going to have our Mentimeter. It's just a way for us to gather some of your thoughts. So if you could scan the QR code here, just go into the Mentimeter. And on my side, I will share the live responses that we get. The question is, what comes to mind upon seeing these images or these news cuttings? So let me take a minute to set my side up. So what comes to mind upon seeing these images? So if you could scan the QR code, it will take you to this link where we saw 4.4 million people being in acute food insecurity. We saw Kenya being in drought. We saw that refugee camps are in crisis. They're about to break their banks because of the severe drought. And at the same time, there is increased climate change and warming. So please scan the QR code and share some thoughts with us.
Could you go back to the QR code, please?
Yes. Rashid has also shared the link in the chat. If you are joining on your laptop or your computer, you can go to menti.com and enter the code 62079464, and that will be posted in the chat as well. So I will resume sharing the live responses. So we see that there is a very vulnerable humanity. We feel overwhelmed. There is a lot of hopelessness. Livelihoods are being affected, a fragile world, strained resources. We need to do different. And that's absolutely why we're talking about systems thinking. You know, the political situation affects all of these things. The social situation is affected and, you know, interacts with all of these things as well. And so we definitely need new approaches to these problems that we can't seem to wrap our heads around. All right, we can resume the main slides, kindly. And so as we get into the main discussion for today, I was just setting some background. We are going to invite Anne Karau. Anne Karau is the program director at Food for the Hungry, and she is going to tell us a little bit about herself. But before she does that, we are going to watch a video together. It will further build on what we've spoken about just now, help us to gain a bit more understanding about the concepts that have led to systems practice and some very real situations that have necessitated systems thinking and systems practice. Hopefully at the end of this, you'll be able to come up with your own definition of systems thinking. but I'm sure that Anne will also be able to elaborate a bit about that. And so here's the video, Systems Thinking, a Cautionary Tale.
In the 1950s, the Dayak people of Borneo, an island in Southeast Asia, were suffering from an outbreak of malaria, so they called the World Health Organization for help. The World Health Organization had a ready-made solution, which was to spray copious amounts of DDT around the island. With the application of DDT, the mosquitoes that carried the malaria were knocked down, and so was the malaria. There were some interesting side effects, though. The first was that the roofs of people's houses began to collapse on their heads. Turns out the DDT not only killed off the malaria-carrying mosquitoes, but it also killed a species of parasitic wasps that had controlled a population of thatch-eating caterpillars, thatch being what the roofs of the Dayak people's homes were made from. Without the wasps, the caterpillars multiplied and flourished and began munching their way through the villagers' roofs. That was just the beginning. The DDT affected a lot of the island's other insects, which were eaten by the resident population of small lizards called geckos. The biological half-life of DDT is around 8 years, so animals like geckos do not metabolize it very fast. It stays in their system for a long time. Over time, the geckos began to accumulate pretty high levels of DDT, and while they tolerated the DDT fairly well, the island's resident cats, which dined on the geckos, did not. The cats ate the geckos, and the DDT contained in the geckos killed the cats. With the cats gone, the island's population of rats came out to play. We all know what happens when rats multiply and flourish. Pretty soon the Dayak people were back on the phone to the World Health Organization, only this time it wasn't malaria that was the problem. It was the plague and the destruction of their grain stores, both of which were caused by the overpopulation of rats. This time, though, the World Health Organization didn't have a ready-made solution and had to invent one. What did they do? They decided to parachute live cats into Borneo. Operation Cat Drop occurred courtesy of the Royal Air Force and eventually stabilized the situation.
Thanks, Liz. And so as Anne comes in with some reflections and thoughts, we can see clearly that this is a real thing that happened in the 60s, and failing to understand the cause of the problem just multiplies the challenges that you face later on. So Anne, welcome. We're looking forward to hearing from you.
All right, thank you so much, Mutile, and hi everyone. It's really good to see a crowd of 34 here. I'm really excited, but maybe before I jump in, you could use a chat box or just raise your hand after watching that video. I'm sure there's some sentiments. I don't know what's running through your mind as you watched that video, like it happened in real life. Any thoughts from anyone? Can be in the chat or just unmute. Claudia felt sorry for the cats and she doesn't even like cats. Yeah, it seems ridiculous. Yeah, it's true. And it's so possible to get it all wrong despite the best efforts. Thanks, Maxi, for that. One more person. Yeah, imagine cats can use, they made it all the way down. I was also amazed by that. Yeah, it's expensive in the long run. That's true. Yeah, keep your thoughts coming. And I think what we're trying to do is just ground the conversation that with the best intent, sometimes, sometimes things are happening in the development space, causing more problems than they occasionally should. So like what, as Mutile was sharing, it's interesting to see that problems are intractable. Things are keeping on coming up. Things are really interconnected. So you sort one thing somewhere and something else pops out somewhere else. So like this afternoon, I was reading an UN OCHA report, and it was saying that IDPs in Africa have tripled to 35 million by 2023. So it seems like things are getting worse and worse, despite best efforts. And that's why for us at Food for the Hungry, we talk about our approaches have been good, but fundamentally insufficient. So it's important for us to rethink how we are doing this, and systems practice and systems thinking provides an opportunity for that to happen. So that's why systems practice, why systems thinking now, just exactly what you guys have written in the chat box. The most well-meaning things can end up causing challenges. You can end up seeing the problems repeated over and over again. But just to break down what is a system, I think it's interesting to just talk about that. A system is a group of things that are interconnected, and they work together. So they're elements, they're interconnected, and they cause a certain purpose. So systems exist wherever we work. At Food for the Hungry, we talk a lot about soft systems. Most of the practitioners, when thinking about systems, think about the hard system, but also soft systems exist. And I think in the series that we continue to have here, we're talking about that. I wanted to just highlight maybe 3 things as a summary to the video you've watched, the slides we've looked at, and we'll sort of like lay ground to the conversations we'll be having, and sort of like to interest you to immerse yourself more in systems practice. There's a really interesting scholar, Donella Meadows, who's been sort of like the mother of systems practice. She says systems thinking, systems practice need not be complicated. You can use simple language to talk about systems. All of us can engage in systems. And I just want to give you 3 blocks to think through as we walk through this. So the first one is interconnectedness of issues. How can we, more and more development practitioners, or as people in normal life, think about things more interconnected and drop a linear way, like this causes only this, because one thing can cause a multiple of issues. So how can we appreciate interconnectedness of issues? So be you in an organization that's working on nutrition or working on other things, how can you look at things more broadly to appreciate the interconnectedness of issues? So if you remember anything about systems, that's one, interconnectedness. The second one is limited resources, and systems practice, systems thinking helps you to zoom out so that you can be able to identify where the most strategic points for leverage are. So if you're constrained with the resources, you don't have so much in your pocket, be it human or financial, systems thinking and systems practice is a really helpful tool to be able to think, okay, let me zoom out, look at the interconnections of issues, and then identify the most strategic place to intervene. So maybe like WHO, if we did that, DDT would not have been your immediate point of entry to address the issue. You'd have zoomed back and seen, okay, this is interconnected. If we did this, this would happen. It has a relation. What are the cultural implications? What are the housing implications, and so on? So systems practice helps you to zoom back, look at the interconnections, and identify strategic things. So if resources are an issue, which they are for all of us, I think systems practice is a way to go. And then the last one, which I think I hold really dear, is complexity. Like, things are so complicated. How can a project that's working to empower women and increase their income, increase gender-based violence? Like, how does that even happen? So issues are so complex and so interrelated, especially because they have a human face. We're working with human beings. So systems practice is a way, and one of the tools, like systems mapping tool, helps you to make sense of the complexity without being simplistic about it, to really understand the complexity and give you a way to enter. So I hope this whets your appetite. And as I answer why now, I don't think I need to belabor that point. I was at Food for the Hungry, we reflect a lot about, for example, the drought situation. Before, the cycles were like 7 years. Now they are 3 to 5 years. So issues are happening more frequent with more intensity. Resources are more constrained. I was reading about, for example, the amount of money we have to meet the SDGs. Like we are very short of meeting the SDGs, and the funding pot is I mean, we have a funding deficit. So that's why now and why systems practice. If we continue to use linear approaches, we will continue to see the same problems day in, day out. We will continue to cause more harm than good. And so we need to take this systems view. And I hope that engaging with the panelists in the next session and also in the group exercise, which I'm so excited for us to do later on, will give you a chance to just immerse yourself in the world of systems and engage with us through this series of unpacking systems practice. So Mutile, I could go on and on. It's an area I'm really passionate about, but let me hand back to you. Yeah, thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Anne. I really liked the last thing you said about how development can sometimes cease to be human. So, just remembering why we are doing this work is because there are human faces behind all of these issues that people are facing. And just also simplifying it and making it relevant. It does seem like a very new discipline in a way, a new way of thinking. And in some ways it might be, but this is a practice that people have engaged with, even in African traditions. There's a way in which we look at interconnectedness, at least within community. So it's not entirely new. And I think there are ways that it can be very real and simple for all of us. All right, so we are going to go back to sharing our own reflections. And now specifically, I'd like us to think about what one thing you are interested in that could be, or that you are currently addressing using a systems thinking approach. And again, we'll use the Menti, so scan the QR code below or go to menti.com and enter the code 6207-9464. And Rashid, please, can we go to the next question? So the question is, what's one thing you're interested in that could be, or that you are addressing using a systems thinking approach? So think about it at a personal level, at a community level, at the national level, or at the global level. So some people say innovation, malnutrition, governance. For me, I would say that the water and sanitation problems in Nairobi need a systems thinking approach. So let's even get more granular. Another example might be planning out your future, might need a systems thinking approach, because you have to think about the opportunities that are in your country, your background, the people that you might need to support later on. And so there are very many ways and levels at which you can apply systems thinking. So even though we are working within social impact and development, I think this is a framework or a mindset that can be adopted across your life. Any more responses to the Menti? Something that could be addressed using a systems thinking approach. Governance is a big one, and one very relevant to Kenya and countless countries around the world in this moment. All right, as you continue to think about that, we can go back to the main slides because right now we are going to go into the panel discussion. We have a wonderful panel that I am happy to introduce to you. We have Alex Maura, we have Claudia Piacenza, and we have Maxi Gitao. I would like to ask them to tell us a little bit about themselves, starting with Claudia, and then we will go into the discussion questions. Over to you, Claudia.
Thank you so much, Mutile, and good afternoon, everyone. Hope everybody's enjoying this conversation. My name is Claudia. I'm based in Nairobi. I am a mom of two. They are my complex problem. They are my most complex challenge I deal with every single day. And sometimes I also work, although they are my two bosses. And in my job, I lead food system design and delivery within Wasafiri, an organization that specializes on system thinking. And as you can see, I am your Muzungu quota for today.
Thank you, Claudia. Alex, I'd love to hear from you next.
Yeah, thank you, Mutile, and nice to be with you all. My name is Alex Mora, and I serve as Country Director with Food for the Hungry Kenya. Born and bred in Kenya, I've been in the development space for close to 16 years now. No, actually 21 years now, with Food for the Hungry for about 16 years. And yeah, I have seen things evolve and become more difficult. And I'm really encouraged to see you all here to have a discussion around how we can do things differently. Yeah, so thanks, Mutile.
Thanks, Alex. And finally, Maxi, please tell us a little bit about you.
Hello, my name is Maxi. I am at a time zone that is 9 a.m. right now. So if my voice sounds like it's waking up, yes, it is. My son and I are on a brief trip to the US. He was participating in something called World Scholars, and he had made it to the Tournament of Champions. So I accompanied him as chaperone, and now he's accompanying me for a few meetings where together we are evangelizing this gospel of systems thinking, user-centered design, and strategic foresight. And I get the privilege to learn a lot from the next generation, from his lens, his stuff. I get the privilege to really see the future from an even more complicated, but also very simple way of looking at it and of approaching it. And I am also the principal consultant and team lead at DD. Pleasure to be here today.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, panelists, for making time. We are going to just go ahead into the questions. We have different questions for each person because you all have different expertise and interests. And there's so much to learn from all of you. So Alex, if you could start us off, help us to understand some of the concepts in systems thinking. And also if you could explain what mindsets and mental models are and how they influence our work.
Yeah, thanks, Mutile. That's a great point to start. And first off, courage to, I'm inspired by the courage for you all in this call to begin having this discussion around systems thinking. But let me take a step back and talk about systems practice, which is what we are discussing, and try and draw the connections between systems practice, systems thinking, and the systems journey. So systems practice is a big idea. It is hinged on the belief that we can truly understand and manage complex issues of the real world, which is what we were discussing right now. And we are acknowledging that by doing systems practice, that complexity can't be ignored. But we are also telling ourselves that if we view the world correctly, confidently embracing what is happening in the world, rather than just fearing it and saying, no, we can't do that, we can manage that complexity. So that's what systems practice aims to do. And I've paraphrased that definition by Sherwood. Systems thinking, on the other hand, is a set of principles which looks to address complex problems in practical and tangible ways by examining the relationships between different parts, what Anne was referring to as interconnectedness of that system, and making use of multiple and diverse perspectives. So when thinking of systems thinking, we are looking at the complex problem and trying to see how do these relationships between the complex problem work? So let me try situate that, then I'll talk a bit about the mindsets and mental models. So let's take the example of post-independence Kenya. So that we get independence, and our founding fathers identified certain areas of focus to move the country forward. At the time, poverty was an issue, disease was an issue, illiteracy was an issue. So the government and development actors pulled in their resources and have worked over the years to improve the outcomes in these areas. So billions of shillings, millions of dollars have been invested to tackle poverty, to contain a range of preventable diseases, to reduce illiteracy levels. But even with all that, we know that there are still wicked and complex problems in certain parts of the country. So for example, while the national average of poverty is 36%, it's gone down. In Samburu East, where FH is working, has a poverty rate of 72% in 2024. Adult illiteracy levels are at an all-time high. We know that acute malnutrition is a serious issue and endemic in that area. We have areas with rates of up to 30%, which is way higher than the emergency thresholds. And then this is all happening against the backdrop of massive but singular, linear poverty reduction programs, women empowerment projects, IGAs, and so on. So this calls us to think differently about how to solve the problem, because even if the government has set up itself and other actors to try and tackle these issues, there are still problems in certain pockets. So that's where the mindset comes in. And looking at the Samburu mapping that we were doing, we know that solving that problem takes collective wisdom, collective intelligence to try and understand the problem and to try and find solutions to the problem. So just some distinctions from a mindset standpoint on what systems thinking would be. Conventional thinking, for example, would be, say, a policy or program designed to achieve short-term success, assuming that that will assure long-term success. But in systems thinking, we see that most quick fixes have unintended consequences. And we saw that with the video that Anne showed. And they make no difference or matter worse in the long term. So that's the shift, in the mindset. And just to tackle the mental models, we discuss a lot at FH, and this is known in the systems practice and systems thinking approaches, is the iceberg model, where at the tip of the iceberg, we see just a little bit of what's happening, which is the event. But beneath the iceberg, there are patterns and trends, there are underlying structures, and at the bottom of the iceberg is the mental models. Why are things working the way they are working, and trying to understand that. So I think how that influences our work is it points us to digging to the root causes of complex problems, of wicked problems, trying to understand them at that level so that we can improve the health of the system. So an example is when we were doing the systems map for Samburu East, and now we are designing the solutions, we found that we could not see the economic system, that's a system we are mapping there, without thinking about leadership and governance issues, without thinking about cultural practices such as FGM and child early and forced marriage that affect the communities, without thinking about the rich but untapped biodiversity and ecosystems in the area and issues of banditry and so on. So all these things are intricately interconnected and keep the system functioning as it is. Over to you, Mutile.
Amazing. Thank you so much for highlighting how collective intelligence and knowledge is important, because when you're thinking about a system, there's a diversity of actors, and so no one person can have all the knowledge to fix, so to speak, the system. Moving over to what currently exists, and this is to you, Maxi. What are the current common ways of working and mental models? What is business as usual, in your opinion, in social impact and development?
I've been reflecting on this question, and it's so interesting that after, let's say, what now, 6 years of DD working in the social impact space, it is truly difficult to come and say there is one way of working. There is business as usual, because we are ecosystem shifters ourselves. We don't necessarily work as business as usual, but we have worked with clients where in some cases their business as usual has been, maybe we are trying to think about a strategy, an organizational strategy refit that allows our staff to work from home and work from the office at the same time. As simple as that. The complexities around that already ruffles the feathers when it comes to what would ordinarily be thought as business as usual, because you have to think about wellness, you have to think about productivity, you have to think about turnaround time for things. You have to think about even just the emotional connection that comes when we are at the same space and in the same work. Yet you also to think about geography and time zone distribution, very different things. And there is no one organization that is similar to another when it comes to the system. So I do acknowledge that there are we ourselves and the clients we work with, we're always trying to seek to speak to the variability and the complexity across a lot of the relationships and issues and partnerships that we find, to the extent where they may not necessarily be a business as usual in the social impact space. Some of the clients we work with are governments, and some ministries are way advanced in terms of how they think about their own way of approaching the systemic issue. If it is the Ministry of Health and the component that they're working around is HIV, they realize that HIV cannot be dealt with when you're not thinking about the triple threat of HIV, teen pregnancy, and GBV among adolescent girls. So working with what used to be called the National AIDS Control Council now has become the Syndemic Disease Control Division, working with them to design a triple threat approach, but with the realization that because it's not a single issue, they are all often sexual and gender-based, and therefore there'd have to be a lot of components that are discussed and unpacked just to ensure that one of them or the multiplicity of them are addressed, especially to the ones that would ordinarily be left behind. And in this case, we've tended to call them the key populations or the most affected populations. And if it's girls who are minor girls who are also engaged in sex work and who are also engaged in, who are also teen moms, the issue, when you look at that particular individual and the system that they represent and the components of things that need to change for them, from economic empowerment and livelihood support to RMNCH for them and for their young one, that's reproductive, maternal, child health for them, but also to their own education and continuing, but also now the early childhood education for their young one, to nutrition, which is a huge issue that you need to think about the mother and the child. There is always a multiplicity of issues. So in essence, for every organization, for every institution, every movement, whatever issue that anyone is working with, there is no one layer to look at it. And that we can conclude and say, then that is the common line. That is the baseline when it comes to like, what is business as usual? Business as usual is that everyone in their own life, every organization, every leader, every departmental head, every program team somewhere, whatever issue you are thinking about, there is 3 ways to look at it. There is the way it is currently, and it cannot be in silo, but it's to look at it, is it addressing the issues that affect the most affected person at the most? And then there is also the need to look at it from that ecosystem approach. This is the issue, or rather, this is the person, the issues that are affecting or surrounding this person are many, but this is also the possible futures that they could get into. So we often go with the tag user-centered systems thinking and future practice, or future strategic foresight, as sort of like a plug and play approach to address some of these issues. Back to you, Mutile.
Thank you, Maxi. I think that's a perspective I perhaps had not really thought about, that there's actually no real business as usual, which is a good starting point. And as we continue to think about mental models too, Claudia, what are some of the ways that you have worked to address mental models in your area of influence?
Yes, I think when it comes to mental models, probably the biggest thing that I learned when I started exploring system thinking, that really was a bit of a big aha moment for me, is that as much as we say the systems are broken, we say systems don't deliver on the poor, systems don't support marginalized community, systems are letting young women alone when they are, when they have undesired pregnancy. We often use this expression, systems are broken, but systems are an equilibrium that works. The issue is that they work for someone, sometimes, somewhere. And so if you acquire this notion that actually what you're really doing is trying to shift powers, trying to shift the system from working for someone to probably working for someone else, the way you look at complexity radically change. There is no way that a system can change without showing resistance. We know, if you look at the history and we think about big systemic shifts regarding the issue of institutions and governance, where there is, moving from being a colonized country to an independent country, or moving from a regime to a democracy, there's always be a part where those in power, those in charge, resist the change. Now, the same applies to the smallest system you can think of, the one we all experience, let's say a family. If a child decides to manage relationship different, the parent will resist the change. If an older sibling is challenged by the younger sibling, the older sibling will resist the change. I think we all have lived the experience of that. And so for me, in a way, this is a must-have lens that we put on when we approach system thinking. Be ready to make somebody deeply unhappy. Be ready to manage their resistance. If things are smooth sailing, you're not shifting systems there. The other aspect that I think is super important is that we need to be comfortable to work with the messy. We heard that the linear model, the logical framework model, the input-output change approach basically only work in Soviet Union when all the variables were controlled. It doesn't work anywhere else. So the reality is much more messy than that. It's probably one step forward, one step sideways, two steps backwards. And not everybody is comfortable with that. So I think for me, a mental model that really has to sink in is to have an element of comfort with the mess. And the third one, which is another must-have in terms of mental model, is that collaboration is not a nice tag we can attach on system thinking, is to the core, is so essential, is in the definition of approaching a system. So if we think all the issues we touched on, drought, extreme poverty, marginalization, no organization, no individual, no matter how powerful they are, no matter how well-resourced they are, can really address that. So what do we need to do is to really look at partnership differently. And one motto that we use a lot in the network that I support is that we need to leave egos and logos at the door and really put at the center of collaboration the challenge we want to face. And that's easier said than done. We all have egos that get bruised in the process. We all have organizations that want to be branded. We all have all those like competing clients we are serving really. But if we truly serve the problem, we must look at collaboration in a different way and move past the idea that collaboration is a little bit of a lip service. So for me, all those elements all translate into a different way to lead systemic change. The human aspect of who is going to initiate the change, who is going to model those behavior, who is going to convene different actors, who is going to look at things and not afraid to actually tackle power shift. Those are all characteristics of what I call leadership for system transformation. And those are essential. And please don't get me wrong, when I say leaders, I'm not referring to C-suite folks or people at the top of government. I'm referring to every single one of us in the change we want to see in our daily life.
Absolutely. I think that was really powerful, bringing to mind who holds the power and who defines what the system is. There's a quote by Stafford Beer. He says, "The purpose of the system is what it does." So it's definitely very challenging to try to disrupt a system. So I'd like to pivot a little bit to talking about experiences, your experiences as systems practitioners. And for this one, we'll again start with you, Alex. How have you navigated environments that are particularly resistant to change, as Claudia has just mentioned, because of the structures, the policies, or personalities involved? How have you dealt with that?
Yeah, thanks, Mutile. And I like that point on leaving your egos and logos at the door when trying to think about systems. But in terms of navigating environments that are particularly resistant to change because of the structures, policies, personalities, I think understanding, trying to get deep at understanding what the root cause of an issue is critical. And sometimes those root causes are complicated in and of themselves and complex because they're embedded in culture and they're also embedded in practices that are part of a community, group, or people. So you may introduce an intervention, but it only goes so far because there's a way men perceive women, there's a way women perceive men, as an example, or there's a way they perceive their assets so that they can't be converted into value. So I think getting at the root cause and think the iceberg and trying to get deep to understand what that is, I think is critical to help you navigate resistant environments to change. And then I'll give two quick examples for some projects I was part of that were trying to address system issues. One is water. Access to water is, in the ASAL counties is a really big challenge. And I would be in Marsabit and go to water points even within town back then. This was around 2017-18. And I'd see like women with jerry cans and very long lines, trying to collect a few jerry cans of water. So we designed this project and it was introducing a piece of technology called a prepaid meter. Then it was innovative. Now it's become mainstream. But it was a new thing we were introducing, and there was a lot of resistance around it because the meter would bring more accountability to revenue collection at that communal water point. But then from a more social standpoint, it would help women get water any time of the day when they need it at the right price and get on with their day. and reduce the time poverty associated with spending a whole day for some on the line collecting water. So introducing this brought a lot of resistance. And I remember even being told, you know what, we can't implement that, return the money to the donor. But we stuck with it. And we tried to explain why it's important and have the conversations with key stakeholders, back to a point Claudia raised on collaboration, to discuss why this would be useful. So fast forward, we installed the meter in one community water point. It was very difficult. Others rejected it. But then once they saw how it's working, it just took on. And now the county is like it's a county thing. It's no longer an FH thing. Water points that are constructed need to have a water meter, and the county has said that, a prepaid water meter. And that puts all those communal water points on the pathway to household connections, which is where we want to get at the end of the day. And the other is one which is more cultural, on FGM and child early forced marriage, and trying to engage the clan structure to make a declaration to end FGM. So this was a proof of concept project. We engaged the clan structure. They made a declaration to end FGM. Even the president said FGM must stop, but we know that it still continues. But I had a story yesterday that in Kajiado, the women actually have to go to Tanzania because the law is being reinforced in Kenya. So that practice is still happening, but we're on the pathway to helping it stop. But it's not going to just stop by one organization doing it. It will take an orchestration of actors to be able to bring out that change. So that's how I've in the past navigated those difficult environments that are resistant to change. Back to you, Mutile.
Thank you, Alex. I think it's clear that systems practice definitely calls for resilience and, ability to stay the course no matter how long or tough it might be. Moving on maybe to Claudia. Wasafiri has developed a systems thinking framework for tackling complex problems. Please, could you tell us a bit more about this and the rationale behind it?
Thanks, Mutile. I'm going to pop in the chat a link for people to have some time afterwards to perhaps have a read. I'll walk you through that. So what I'm really excited about this approach, we call it system craft, is that it's been retro-engineered from the practice. So after many years of working, particularly in East Africa and primarily on conflict, we developed a methodology, and really the methodology has been designed with practitioners in mind. There are a lot of frameworks out there that are much more designed for researchers or analysts. This is really to help people say, what do I do next? Is to help people answer that question. How do I approach this? Because often we feel a bit overwhelmed when we have unpacked all those different interconnected issues. So in the system craft methodology, there are some suggestions about how to develop a mindset for system thinking. I was mentioning just some a bit earlier, but there are others that are also pertaining, for instance, to looking at windows of opportunity, approaching in an agile way, moving more into the territory of testing and probing rather than having a plan layout for all the time ahead. But there are also very specific tools, and the tools speak to the diagnostic when we're trying to understand a problem, as well as to the design, where we're trying to actually figure out what we can do about it. So we called those the 5 dimensions of change, and we decided that it had to be no more than 5 so that you can remember them on your hand. And the idea really is that those dimensions help you look at the issue in a way that can be as comprehensive and as possible. I'm going to mention them, but I'm not going to in detail explain all of them. I'll just give you an example about one of them. And then the link that I share, if those of you that want to know more, you can have a bit of a read. So one dimension is called Organize for Collaboration. The name is on the tin, is about really getting structure to drive change. One is called Set the Direction and understanding sort of where the movement is, where the energy is. And another dimension is called make it matter. This is basically what I mentioned earlier. Who's the problem serving, and who needs to make the change? Who do we need to convince to make the change? How do I make it matter to them? Change the incentive is a really critical one, because often we are very aware of the formal incentives, taxation, regulations, but we're less aware of the informal incentive, the socioeconomic one, the values. And then the last one is called harness collective intelligence. And this really is coming from the notion that no one single point of view can give you the full understanding of the system. You know, some of you might be familiar with the image of an elephant with 5 blindfolded scientists touching different parts of the elephant, and each of them think, oh, it's a truck or it's a fan. But only when they bring together all the perspectives, they understand it's an elephant. And we experienced a moment like that a few days ago. And do I have 2 minutes, Mutile, to tell this story? Because I feel this story is quite powerful. So one of our fellows in the African Food Fellowship is passionate about making agriculture more attractive and most feasible for young people. And he's a young farmer himself, he's a young entrepreneur. And so he's looking at the issue in terms of the barrier to access farming. He starts lowering the cost of inputs. He starts looking at solutions to make pest management more affordable, all very important things. But here we are in this group discussion where lots of people from all across food systems start talking about this problem. And people suddenly share, well, you know, the issue is that when you are in school, agriculture is kind of a punishment. So you grow up with this idea that, oh, you don't behave, go and fetch water. I mean, this is very familiar, I'm sure, for many of you. For me, it was not, I didn't realize it was that strong. And so here we start exploring, how do you change the narrative? How do you actually understand? How can you influence the narrative even before it becomes a problem you're trying to address? How do you look at those conditions that create this perception in young people? So then it means you start working with children or with parents or with schools, even though really we are targeting us, our young entrepreneurs in agriculture. So this is what I mean by harnessing collective intelligence. This is an example that if you are a business person, you will be very familiar with the challenges of doing business. If you're a civil society organization, you know how hard it is to influence policy. If you're a community leader, you know the struggle your people go through. But you always have a partial understanding of the issue. And so mechanisms that bring people together, whether it's forums, networks, multi-stakeholder partnerships, research that is done in a deliberate way to comprehend all the different voices, bringing the voices of those affected by the problem at the right table, at the decision-making level. This is how you bring those perspectives into practice, really. Yes, I'll stop here. I hope that that was a good enough answer.
Absolutely. I like the 5 tips you shared. What I remember was incentives, because incentives are what make people do things. So that's a really important point that I think I'll be taking forward. As we slowly start to wrap up the panel, to you, Maxi, please could you share one win you have attained as a result of using a systems thinking approach in your work?
Thank you, Mutile. And I'm particularly very happy that we are sharing this panel with Claudia and Alex, both of whom are speaking this from food systems perspective. And that's really good. People should not be hungry. Organizations, though, are also going through a lot of need to change. We have seen that systems thinking is important to approach when you're thinking of like the ecosystem that the organizations are working on, and usually that is on issues, but also an organization is an issue. And I want to, for the few minutes that I have to speak, I want to speak about this from an organization lens. We realize that a lot of our clients who are whom we work with themselves fundamentally want to embrace a systems thinking approach even towards their own strategy, towards operations, towards, you know, how they dissect the intricate connections among the various facets of challenges that are presented to them on an everyday basis. And so systems thinking, as we say, we are evangelizing that it's not just a discipline that we think of when it comes to issues that the organization is dealing with at the community level. It is also issues that the organization is dealing with at an internal level. And that by itself, we've seen it is producing fundamental shifts, transformational shifts in terms of how problems are getting solved, operational problems are getting solved. We believe that this is a philosophy that should underpin everyone and anyone working in any organization. And we have seen this conceptual framework as an arsenal of tools, of methods to curate, to craft, to use to gain this holistic understanding of even the world of work in which organizations themselves are operating in, so that they can innovate better, so that they can facilitate their own internal processes a lot better. And we've seen in terms of like wins, organizations move from a particular operating system, and I would like to call it operating system 1, where they're just dealing with like at the litany level. It is a space where events and trends are affecting them and are finding them. They are not necessarily prepared for them. Issues like AI, the post-pandemic resilience of organizations, how leaders and organizations themselves needed to make adaptations. A lot of that was reactionary to the event. You know, ChatGPT has come, so how do we adapt? And at times, we've seen some nice organizations work in-house in innovation and innovation labs and say, here is an innovation unit, let's keep going, let's keep thinking, how do we increase remote work and online collaboration, and also ensure that mental and physical, psychological health of our employees is not getting affected? How do we shield ourselves from the need to constantly have reduced expenses within our organizations, and also like a possible slower uptake in terms of some of the services that we are offering? Those are fundamental questions that most of the organizations are asking. And at that level, it's very reactionary. But we've seen and supported partners at an organization level to move into a place where we are, as my colleagues are saying now, let's unpack the structures and the systems layer, the underlying causes. Let's really ensure that we understand the social, the technological, the economic pressures, the environmental, political, cultural, historical issues and evolutions that impact our own practice as an organization, but also our own offerings as any organization. And every organization we're working with is having to think about issues of like inflation surges and possible layoffs and escalated costs and geopolitical tensions and what that would mean. In Kenya, for instance, right now, it is difficult to, just based on how the finance bill process in the country went this year, the Gen Z protests, the very high levels of mistrust to both the church and the state. These are issues that, regardless of what organization, it does have an effect, you know, on operations on a daily basis. And therefore, just the support to analyze and emphasize how does this affect us, how do these structures and systems affect us, is very important. Then moving deeper, we also now help track the worldview and the values layer. And those are the paradigms, as some of my colleagues have said, so that we can sustain the trends and the legitimate, someone mentioned legitimate causes of the things that an organization will need to deal with. I won't mention the name, but there was one of the organizations we were working with that needed to employ human-centered design practices and ensure that those are widespread. And in the process of doing that, they wanted to have a more flatter work culture to enable collaboration, and therefore employed a lot of technology so that they can do so. But the challenge was that the technology they were employing, they were equating that to innovation. And innovation is not necessary. When you think about the innovation ecosystem from a systems lens, you realize that technology is last. Technology actually comes last. It's not what is at the front. And because of the fact that the change, the organizational and cultural change that they needed to do, needed for them to have the DEI efforts, diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts really magnified. Those increased inclusivity, but also tended to also bring about tokenism. So while working towards one thing, they started having diversity hires for the sake of diversity hires, and that came at a cost, So we provided our expertise to try and navigate this at a slower pace that allows for them to think about these things from a more holistic level. And that leads us now to, and the final point I want to say is that deepest layer, which is the deep myth or metaphor layer that we attempt with our clients and with our partners and stakeholders to articulate those very, within an organization, very unconscious core beliefs. And often we say there'll always be a tension between the pull of the past, the pull of the present, and the push of the future. And often the pull of the past is what is surrounded by this mythical unconscious belief that there is a way things have always worked out, that will always work out. Things will play out in a particular way. And here is where now we do come in to say, all right, there are some changes that if we do not address systemically and procedurally, we will find ourselves just going round and round the circle, very much similar to the video that we saw there. And that is as key to organizations as it is key to the field that the organizations are serving. So we have many wins where we have supported organizations think through the sectors that they are thinking of, but also organizations themselves to think through within their own organization what it does look like. Back to you, Mutile.
Amazing. I think it's great to remember that an organization itself is a system, because all the people do different things, have different functions, are interconnected and have their own histories, their own perceptions, their own things that drive how they work. And so that was really useful. We have unfortunately come to the end of the panel discussion. Thank you very much again to the panelists. So now we will take a quick 5-minute break and then reconvene and go through a very interesting complexity exercise. So see you in 5 minutes. All right, I hope you have had a chance to stretch a little bit and grab some water. I think it would be good to continue now and go into the systems thinking exercise. Please put a thumbs up if you are back.
I am back. How long should the breakout rooms be?
Let us do 20 minutes as we are a little bit behind.
All right, perfect. Okay, I am opening the rooms in 1 minute.
Okay, no, just before you do, can we go to the next slide?
Okay.
Okay, so we are now going to go into breakout rooms and we will do a quick systems thinking exercise because we've talked a lot about complexity. And so maybe the reason why the solutions that we've been having towards problems have not worked is because we don't understand the type of problem we're dealing with. And so we're going to interact with the Cake Rocket Child Complexity Framework, which helps you to think about the nature of the problem you're dealing with. And the tool breaks down problems into three types, and one was added later. So a simple problem, would be baking a cake. A complicated problem would be sending a rocket to the moon. A complex problem would be raising a child, and a wicked problem would be preventing biodiversity loss. Next slide, please. So a cake, why is a cake a simple problem? Well, it has a formula to it. There's a number of ingredients that usually go into a cake, the temperature at which the cake bakes, and so it's not very difficult to figure it out. And there's generally a consensus on how a cake is baked. Next slide, please. when we come to a rocket considered a complicated problem, what makes it complicated exactly? Well, first, there's quite a high level of expertise that is required, probably at least a PhD in astrophysics or something like that. But at the same time, sufficient repetitions and tests can make it achievable. But there's also a very specific method to do it. So while anyone can learn to bake a cake and can do it and probably has done that in their lifetime, not everyone will be able to build a rocket and launch it. Next slide, please. And then we come to raising a child. As Claudia mentioned earlier, this is a complex problem because there are so many factors involved in raising a child. There's no one singular approach to raising a child that can be agreed upon. There are many genetic, environmental, social factors that influence how the child turns out as an adult. And so it's very difficult to predict how a child will be when they're old. And so this is the breakdown of the cake rocket child complexity typology. And this is what you'll be discussing in breakout sessions for 20 minutes. The panelists will guide you through understanding the types of problems that, are close to you. And so I think once you're ready, Liz, then we can open up the breakout rooms and go into those discussions. I'm just checking if you're all back.
People are coming in slowly.
All right.
Yeah, it gives them about 60 seconds to leave. So, yep, now everyone is on.
All right. Okay. So that was a very quick exercise. I'm sure we could have gone into more detail if we had more time. But I wonder if there are any takeaways from your breakout rooms. What stood out to you just in 60 seconds during your breakout room discussion? So maybe I could ask Claudia if you are representing your group or if you have someone in your group who will speak on the group's behalf.
Thanks, Mutile. I think in my group, people were passionate about very, very complex issues. We talk about FGM, we talked about violence on children, we talked about HIV/AIDS, education in the lens. So obviously those questions, the questions were really showing how deeply committed the people in the group were about trying to address this problem. And so we spent most of the time trying to explore, okay, what does it mean to look at those problems from a different point of view, knowing that we are not coming up with solution in a small breakout group, but we're maybe just exploring unfamiliar ways to look at very familiar issues. And I really invite everybody that was in my group to perhaps share whether they found something, whether they heard something new.
All right. Anyone else from Claudia's group who would like to share? Okay, so I think we can move on to Max. Oh, please go ahead. Sorry.
Thanks, Mutile. I just wanted to highlight something that was mentioned in our group, that when you are choosing to solve these problems, when you're thinking about what solutions to provide, it's good for you to understand, what kind of problem it is. Is it a simple problem? Is it complicated, or is it a complex one? And that was what Claudia really helped us see as we were having that discussion.
Thank you, Evelyn. Maxi, any takeaways from your group?
Yes, we nominated Moses Letole, who is in Samburu and dealing with quite some interesting and complex issues to speak about it. Although in our group we discussed about cars and cars breaking up, and then we discussed about coffee machines not working in the morning. Yeah, just some real life things, but then also now we got into the complex one. So we want to invite Moses to help us deal with the complex ones. Moses?
Yeah, thank you. In our group, I think we had a very fruitful discussion because we agreed that it's not easy to deal out with the big world without understanding, first of all, problems within you, within self, and also going broader, expanding now to the community, the surrounding that we're living within, now going beyond there. And during our discussions, we had a number of examples, like now the ones that Max had just mentioned about the car breakdown, about the coffee machine not working in the morning hours. And again, those are just maybe some of the simple problems that we can think of. And we had a few maybe scenarios where we had some complex problems that you could see like they are simple, but in the long run, they're just complex. And these are majorly from the culture of Samburu people. Like we talk of FGM. You decide to get these women who undergo this FGM and even the girls, train them, let them know the importance or the negative effects of FGM. But in the long run, you find that maybe that thing is not working. Why? Is it becoming a complicated thing? Because a complex problem. It's because maybe you're not addressing the elders. Because when you get an elder and you try to have this discussion with them, they think like this is an isolated moment for just women alone, and they are the decision makers actually. So you find maybe we are tackling this problem as a simple thing, but it is really deep that needs a deeper lens to work on it. And another typical example is actually on this area of Samburu, whereby we are talking of this place being marginalized. And we know we always have some questions in our discussions, even with the community members, that for how long have we been marginalized, that for us to receive something like relief food, it has been there for over 30 years. And they have been getting relief food. The solution then was actually to address the hunger, but now it is going beyond there. And the big question is, what is not working such that we've not gotten out of that in this particular era, in this decade where we're almost getting to the 2030 vision. And that's really becoming a big issue. And it started as a simple thing of just giving food for us to address the hunger. But now it is getting beyond there, because if it is not there, people are becoming like they are so much dependent on this help, because they are used to it to the point that they would just relax, wait for relief. So those are just some of the examples that we discussed, that a problem can be simple, and even you can start it simple, thinking that maybe you can solve, but maybe it is creating more problems and more troubles and making it more complex. Thank you. Maybe the team can add some more examples if there are any that I've left out. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Moses. That was a huge question. Thank you very much. I think we can move to Alex's group. Any takeaways?
Yeah, we tried to actually map out the problems using the tool. So I'll just have Nicholas, if you're available, just share one or two insights from the process and how we saw the different issues, including what would be an emerging complicated issue of waste management. So Nicholas, please take the mic.
So in our group, we used the tool as Alex said, and we began first. The first idea we actually explored was a highly complex issue, which was poverty. And we kind of settled on the fact that it's a highly complex issue because it can lead to other issues. So it is a problem that on its own develops a whole catalyst of other problems. And we observed it, and we also looked into waste management. But with waste management, we put it under a complicated issue. And the difference was, when you look at something like waste management, the level of problem that it sort of takes is not necessarily the same across the board. So with poverty, we could all say that is a problem. But with waste management, some people may not see it as a big problem and others may see it as a bigger problem, which complicates the whole entire issue. And so we then now broke it down and realized that so when now we are looking at problems and looking at complicated issues and highly complex issues, we were able to now separate them based on the levels of different things in between them. And by the time we get to the sector that should deal with them, we were able to now clearly see how those problems can either start to being solved in an orderly manner or somehow, let's say, stopped because some of the problems are not easily solvable, or how the problems could then start to be backtracked. And that's the kind of conversations we're exploring.
Yeah, thanks, Nicholas. And just to add an insight, like looking at this tool, even highly complex problems can have sub-problems. So you can also diagnose them based on the tasks of each of those problems to determine now what will you actually act on, from a systems practice issue. But yeah, great discussion doing the mapping. Back to you, Mutile.
Thank you. I think there is Anne. Anne, did you have any insights from your group that you can share?
Yeah, sure. So our issues were ranging from buying stationery for our training, as simple, all the way to the governance electoral system. And I'll invite Isabella just to make just a reflection on her insights, if she can.
Very briefly, thank you very much, Anne. My key takeaway really was around systems and systematic. that whereas the two words might look the same, for something to be systematic would probably be that it's falling in maybe the cake category, that you are simply following one step after the other. But when you look at the complexity of systems, it's really to say that there are so many intricate details in there. Some of those details might be systematic. So, for example, when we looked at elections, going to the poll and ticking can be a very simple aspect, and we could put it under maybe under the simple. We could put it under the simple category. But if you were to look at the complexity of maybe governance or the entire election cycle, then it's not enough to conclude that because you could walk to the polls and just tick, then this particular, then it's not maybe a complicated aspect. But we also talked about the predictability of results when we are looking at the tool, that the results under, for example, cake making are very predictable. The results under dealing with rockets are very predictable. The results under complicated systems are probably less predictable, and the ones under complex under a complex environment are probably unheard of. Like, you'd be shocked with whatever lands in your lap you take, because you can't really predict what will come your way. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I've just loved the diversity of these responses, and, you know, talking about casting a vote all the way to governance, talking about, in my group, we talked about period poverty, and there was a bit of a discussion of whether it's a simple problem or a complex one. And I suppose in some ways it can be simple, like has been addressed earlier. You give a pad to someone who doesn't have one. But if you look at the broader context, you really have to understand the environment in which this poverty exists. So do these girls have access to water and sanitation? Is there sufficient waste disposal? And what are the underlying beliefs around uptake of menstrual products? These are all challenges that are faced by people who face period poverty. I think that was really interesting and insightful. We are drawing towards the end. And I'd just like to ask if there are any final questions and reflections in 1 minute, and then at 30 minutes past, we will definitely close. So any final questions, feel free to raise your hand.
I would just love to mention that just going back to a conversation we've had today about what does it currently look like? Currently, it looks like we all need to invest time to think about our 2025 and the systems that we are walking into. And I do hope this is just like a very personal call to us as we are closing the year, that systems practice becomes something that we truly embody, and that we use to think about and to plan for 2025. At an individual level, as we are closing the year and thinking about the next year, you know, the 8 cycles of life or circles of life, physical, spiritual, family, community, career, etc., that we are a system as an individual. So we have the time these holidays to think about that, but also for our organizations as we move into next year, and also for the systems that we actually work in. I think it does take time. Time is money, but it's a worthwhile investment to think of it from an individual, an organization, and as an actual sectoral level to really employ systems thinking, and add on to that yourself as the user or whichever user, and the possible or potential futures that you do hope for. So thank you very much for organizing this call. It's been a pleasure to be part of it.
Absolutely. Thank you for those remarks and for bringing us to a really nice conclusion. It has been a very enriching discussion with you all. And what's next is that we see this as the first part of a series. We really want to continue this conversation about systems practice. We know how timely it is, how important it is, because, you know, there's just so much short-termism currently in our way of doing things, in our governments, in our, you know, just our ways of doing things. And so we hope to build up on what we've started today. So please keep in touch with us and look out for information about this. We are very keen to continue this in 2025. And with that, I'm pleased to wish you a very good rest of the evening. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you and happy
Thank you and bye-bye.
Thank
you.
Thanks, Mutile, for hosting. Thank you so much, DD team. Thanks, everyone, for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are we just us?
Not yet. It's just us.
All right. Thanks, everyone. I'm not sure what the protocol is at this